Earlier in this course, we spent time reviewing the work of Wiggins and McTighe in Understanding by Design. You may remember that in the UBD process, there were 3 stages. Stage 1 included identifying clear desired results, and only in Stage 3 did you begin to consider activities. Stage 2 is at the heart of Understanding by Design, as it calls upon us to clarify the student evidence we will elicit to determine if they have achieved the learning goals we set out for in the unit of study. In Unit 7, as we establish pre-informative assessments as evidence, it is the spirit of the UBD Stage 2 that we embrace. Note that when we begin to plan for pre-informative assessments, we are not necessarily concerned whether these are quizzes, homework, or projects and tests. Rather than the focus being on the format of the evidence we elicit, the focus is on any evidence that tells us where students are starting, where they are now, what feedback they need to keep their learning moving forward, and to celebrate their growth toward the unit's Level 3 proficiency or success criteria. Whether it is an exit slip, or entry task, or some sort of practice or a more formal formative assessment, this is all just evidence about what a student now knows, understands, and is able to do. This evidence guides our next instructional decisions. The next few slides outline and share some key assessment wisdom gained throughout the years from important educational researchers. For example, Heritage and Harrison state that 20 years of research shows that formative assessment is a game changer. Additionally, Black and William wrote a very important article that's included in your resources called Inside the Black Box, in which formative assessment is defined as encompassing all those activities undertaken by teachers and or by students, which provide information to be used as feedback to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. Heritage and Harrison go on to say that teachers need to have an understanding of how learning progresses in a discipline. Heritage has done a lot of work around learning progressions and wanting to make sure we know that success criteria are placed on a larger trajectory of learning, connecting current learning to previous and future learning. Knowing a standard is at DOK Level 3, but only requiring students to demonstrate their learning at a Level 2 is misleading to both teachers and students, according to Schimmer. And students will achieve only the level that we provide them the opportunity to gauge in, according to Nicole Vagel. We have talked about this a lot in terms of making sure each and every learner has access to Level 3 and 4 thinking and experiences every single day. Building and using formative assessment with the identified targets within a learning progression will advance proficiency. Remember, we don't do formative assessment. We use formative assessment with students in the service of moving their learning forward. And Ainsworth and Donovan say that analyzing student results from pre-assessments may, in fact, save you instructional time. Essential questions answered throughout standards-based evidence include: do we have clarity about our foundational learning targets, success criteria, and proficiency scales for this unit of study? What do we or I already know? What does a pre-assessment tell me about myself as a learner or about us as a community of learners? Where do we or I need to go next? What are the formative assessments telling us as both individuals and as a community of learners where we now need to go? The use of pre-informative assessments is not only meant for use with individual students. Engaging an entire class as a community of learners in clarity around the targets and scales for the unit of study, as well as collaboratively monitoring progress toward the success criteria, can be a powerful strategy for engaging students as assessment partners and setting up classroom support systems. In this example of a 7th grade math classroom, the students know the math targets for the year and their connection to each unit of study. They understand the proficiency scale via the depth of knowledge, and together, as a class, they are watching themselves move ahead on their learning journey. Additionally, the teacher is working with individual students, but toward these common collaborative goals. Where do we go for resources to help us develop pre-informative assessments aligned to the target and scale for our standards-based unit of study? Once again, the Smarter Bounds Content Explorer can provide us assistance in ELA and math, as well as inform other content areas. You will remember in Units 3 and 4, we examined the targets and achievement level descriptors to clarify the unit's success criteria. Additionally, we can now go deeper into the Content Explorer to find all kinds of task models and examples which we can use for pre-informative assessment or that help inform creating our own. Once again, using handout number 7, Smarter Bounds Content Explorer Navigation, complete all the steps listed on the navigation handout. You will be able to examine all the many task models provided to help support and inform your planning for pre-informative assessment for your standards-based unit of study. This slide shows some of what the page looks like with all of the task models. Now take a significant pause and using the handout number 7, access either ELA or math targets to examine various task models. Feel free to also access any resources such as those from Washington State OSPI, your professional organizations, or your instructional materials for a specific content area to examine potential task models that might inform pre-informative assessment for your unit of study as well. Another potential and powerful resource in planning for pre-informative assessment can be found in the Smarter Balanced Interim Assessment Blocks, or IABs. The left side of this slide comes from the technical manual showing that IABs can be used to measure student progress toward mastery of summative assessment targets. The right-hand side of the slide is meant to show how you can log into the Washington Comprehensive Assessment System, WCAP, and take any of these IABs yourself or as a collaborative grade level or content team. Actually taking the IABs can provide a much deeper understanding of the targets and scales for which we are held accountable. They also provide potential pre-informative assessments or inform how we might create our own for our standards-based unit of study. You can use interim assessment blocks in the normal, standard way of assessment, but you are highly encouraged to implement them in a more non-standard manner. After administering the interim assessment blocks, or IEBs, you and the students analyze IEB results together to determine both class and individual student strengths and areas that need targeted instruction. In this way, the entire class is engaged as your assessment partners to determine where they are and where they need to go next. It also helps identify specific knowledge, skills, and understanding in which students may lack background knowledge or have misconceptions. Whether you actually administer the IABs or not, just taking an interim assessment block pertinent to your unit of study can be illuminating and help guide and inform planning for pre-informative assessment. Here are a few ways in which teachers have used IABs. In one school, the social studies department decided to give the reading for informational text, IAB. They taught themselves how to hand score the 1 or 2 items that need hand scoring and also analyzed the assessment results together for the entire school. They discovered that in almost every case, students had difficulty answering 2-part questions. Students were okay in answering the first part of the question, was typically multiple choice. But in the second part of the question, which they had to highlight text and actually justify and give an example of why they came up with their answer, students had difficulty. They presented this to the entire staff and asked, how often are we giving 2-part questions? How often are we requiring students to actually identify the information from the text that supports their answer? Most teachers didn't have any ideas about 2-part questions. And in fact, one brave teacher said, I'm not even sure what a 2-part question is. As a result, the social studies department provided professional development to the entire staff. And it is one of the things that led to this school doubling their proficiency scores in ELA in just 1 year. In another example, a teacher was able to use IABs as a pre-assessment and discover that one of her students didn't even know what the coordinate plane was. In yet another school, the mathematics department decided to use IABs to help toward their school-wide goal of creating a culture of hope. They took each unit of study in mathematics and used an IAB as a pre-assessment and a post-assessment so that students could actually see their growth. Over the year, as this process continued, students were excited to say, "When can we take our post-IAB?" The whole idea is that they came to realize that they're going for growth, and that is the whole point of using interim assessment blocks. Another amazing resource is found in the Smarter Bounce Connections playlists in Math and ELA. These used to be in the digital library, but are now found in the WACAP behind the tile Tools for Teachers. Again, WACAP is a Washington Comprehensive Assessment Program for which you have to have a login and a password. And they have a section in there called Tools for Teachers where you will find these documents. Because the Connections playlists provide both the specific targets and the proficiency scales regarding the learning journey towards a target, these playlists can be powerful for engaging students as assessment partners. Students can mark where they currently are, highlight their areas for growth, and set personal goals. They can even use a highlighter to identify the words they understand in green and the ones they're having trouble with in pink. In one AVID school, teachers gave their students these playlists and had them mark them up in true Wicker style. The Connections playlist can also be a powerful resource for teams of teachers wanting to engage in vertical teaming. In this case, teacher teams use the playlist to examine fractions, targets, and proficiency scales for 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Not only did this provide specific guidance for their standards-based unit planning to ensure effective Tier 1 instruction, it also informed their Tiers 2 and 3 additional support, whether it occurred within the Tier 1 environment or was provided by other staff, including paraprofessionals, in an additional support setting. Having clarity about our standards-based targets and proficiency scales for our unit of study contributes to our collaborative understanding of learning progressions, not only for our own grade level, but across multiple grade levels. If a student is struggling at the middle level in geometry, for example, we can refer to learning targets from earlier grades to inform what additional support may be needed in Tiers 2 and 3. In this way, Tiers 2 and 3 support is always aligned to the Tier 1 learning targets and success criteria for the pertinent unit of study, and is in the service of facilitating student success in Tier 1. This alignment makes standards-based unit planning a critical foundation for student growth and equitable learning outcomes. One 6th grade team created a 10-step process for engaging their learners in the IAB process, which became a cornerstone of each one of their standards-based unit plans in math. As we can see by the results, not only can using IABs inform our pre-informative assessments to monitor student progress throughout our standards-based unit plan, it can also be used to engage learners as assessment partners throughout the unit, both as individuals and as a community of learners. In this case, we can see the amazing progress students made from mid-October to mid-December in this 8th grade unit of study regarding the number system. As we discussed earlier in this course, Wiggins and McTighe often reference this process as backward design. This slide shows an example of how a teacher might set up a student tracking sheet for a standards-based unit of study, which focuses on growth towards specific standards-based targets via a proficiency scale. This example shows how an 8th grade math teacher set up the first page of a student tracking sheet for her unit of geometry so that it indicates both pre and post tests, but also links student evidence to the activities in which students will engage. And on the back of the student tracking sheet, the teacher created a full proficiency scale using the achievement level descriptors found in the Smarter Bounce Content Explorer, but turned each one of these into an I can statement. And just another reminder that using I can statements in our proficiency scales is an effective strategy for building growth mindset in our learners and personalizing the learning. This teacher created student tracking sheets for each of the 7 units she taught throughout the year, thus creating a system in which all students were clear about the targets, the scales, and engaged as assessment partners as they monitored their learning journey from the very beginning of the unit to the end. We're going to take a few minutes now to talk about writing. As we close Unit 7, we want to take note that writing is an important aspect of standards-based unit planning because it is often used to elicit evidence for pre-formative and summative information towards standards-based unit targets. This implicates a potential effectiveness of using common writing rubrics or smarter balanced writing rubrics across all content. Engaging learners as assessment partners in use of writing rubrics and rubric scoring can lead to impressive growth in student writing. In one class, a teacher provided a writing prompt from different content areas every 6 weeks. Students got in groups of 3 and received 3 anonymous papers from other students in the class. They used a common writing rubric to score each paper individually and then got into their trio to determine if they had agreement in their scoring. After working through that process, they decided upon what suggestions they would give the writers of their papers to help them become even more effective. Each team then got up in front of the class, and in what this teacher called Justification Day, they justified the score they gave the papers and provided suggestions for improvement. At the end of the year in this class, which also had several students on IEPs and who were English learners, 100% of the students scored proficient on the state writing assessment. Yes, each and every student as an assessment partner. We end this unit with a reminder of the smarter balanced writing rubrics that can be used across content area, whether the writing focus be explanatory, narrative, opinion, or argument. By setting up standards-based unit of studies for the year and using student tracking sheets to engage our learners as assessment partners, we are not stuck with moving blindly to the next unit, even though students have not mastered specific targets. In this case, students had clearly not yet become proficient in one specific target around the concept of equality. Therefore, this team of teachers brought that target forward into the next unit of study and continued working on it, even though that unit had ended. In this way, as I like to say, the learning store is open 24/7, and we are not slaves to instructional materials that tell us we have to move on. As Wiggins and McTighe would always say, it is not about coverage, it's about uncovering the deeper understanding our students can achieve through well thought out standards-based unit planning. As we complete Unit 7 on planning for pre-informative assessment, consider all the many resources you may have to guide and inform the evidence you will elicit from your learners to determine where they are starting from, where you want them to go, and how they are doing along the learning journey of your unit of study. OSPI can be a valuable resource, as can be the Next Gen Science documents. You may remember that earlier in this course, we looked at the 5th grade physical science standard shown on the left regarding matter and its interactions. At that time, we referenced the connections to the smarter balanced ELA and math targets. The next generation science standards also provide evidence statements, which can guide our pre-informative assessment. On the right-hand side of this slide, we can see the evidence statement for 5th grade matter and its interactions as an example. How might these next generation evidence statements inform your pre-informative assessments throughout your standards-based science units of study? The K-12 social studies standards also provide essential questions. The arts discipline areas of dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts also have a set of standards, and you can find these again on the OSPI website. Health and fitness standards are also available, and there are a lot of good ideas about pre-informative assessments that could be used in health and fitness. The National PE Standards, Shape America, sets the standard. Recently, I did some work with teachers, and one of the teachers is an international language teacher and had not seen this idea of standards-based unit planning. As a result, she sent me an email later that said that this was one of the most helpful things that she had ever done. And now she feels like she could really work with other world language teachers as well. And of course, we've also got CTE, Career and Technical Education. This is a no-brainer for them because they already have a requirement to be aligned to the Common Core standards and therefore aware of the targets and scales, as well as their own leadership standards. As we reach the completion of Unit 7, consider your literature review handout and your activity notes from Unit 7. And now use your Unit Reflections handout number 4 to reflect on the following. Is everyone in the system, including students and paraprofessionals, clear about the standards-based assessment criteria? How does your system set up a pre-assessment for each unit of study and ensure that students know where they're starting from? How does your system set up formative assessments so that you and your students can track progress throughout the unit via the proficiency scale or learning progression? How can you build an effective assessment system that informs your next instructional decisions and students' next learning strategies for your standards-based unit of planning? Thank you for taking some significant time and reflecting upon Unit 7. As we said, pre-informative assessment can be the heart of standards-based unit planning. In Unit 8, we engage in the fun process of creating the student's tracking sheet for our standards-based unit of study so that we can authentically engage learners as our assessment partners. Each of the Washington State instructional and leadership frameworks call for students to be clear about the target and charting and monitoring their progress toward the target and in self-reflecting on their own data so they can set goals. The point here is that engaging students as assessment partners is not a new initiative. It is embedded throughout other initiatives such as effective integrated multi-tiered systems of support, teacher principal evaluation program, as well as in the call for culturally responsive teaching and equitable learning experiences and outcomes. Engaging learners as assessment partners is simply a highly effective instructional strategy as shown by many research studies. Hattie's research indicates that collective teacher efficacy, that is, their collaborative belief that they can positively impact student learning, and students reflecting upon their data and setting goals are two high leverage conditions in an effective school. More specifically, Hattie tells us that an effect size of 0.4 is equal to a year's growth. If building collective efficacy has an effect size of 1.57 and engaging learners as assessment partners has an effect size of 1.33, what kind of growth could we realize in our schools if we built collective efficacy for both educators and for students? Please feel free to access the brief article by Fisher and Fry in your resources on creating assessment-capable learners. As Fry, Hattie, and Fisher maintain in their book, as well as the article I just referenced that is in your resources, and that we have been discussing throughout this course, assessment-capable learners know their current level of understanding, know where they're going, and are ready for the challenge, select tools to guide their learning, seek feedback and see errors as opportunities, monitor progress and adjust their own learning, and recognize their learning, and then teach others. We take a look once again at this graphic, which lays the important role students play in knowing where they're going, where they're now, where they are headed, and how they will get there. Reviewing some examples of students as assessment partners, we begin by reviewing some shared previously in this course as we have engaged in the standards-based unit planning process. You may remember this example of students monitoring their Smarter Balance results for themselves by their scale scores. In addition to students knowing their individual results and setting goals, we can also help students become knowledgeable as to how their individual results are positively contributing to our overall school improvement results and engage them in collaborative school-wide goals. In Unit 7, in which we engaged in planning for pre-informative assessment for our standards-based unit of study, we showed examples of how teachers created student tracking sheets for their units to clearly communicate the learning targets and proficiency scales for the unit, as well as eliciting pre, post, and formative evidence about where students are starting, how they're growing toward the unit success criteria. Another example shows how some teachers and teacher teams have developed tracking sheets using an Excel format. In this example, a teacher created a completely different type of format for her unit on ratios and proportional relationships. She ensured clarity around the target and provided a color-coded version of the proficiency scale while having students enter their evidence and how they were progressing. This student happened to be identified both as an English learner and as qualified for special education services. Throughout the unit, she was actually doing fairly well in the Tier 1 environment, until they came to converting to metric measures. As you can see in this example, the teacher used a formative assessment in deciding to have a one-on-one conference with the student, and during the debrief was able to uncover the student's lack of background knowledge and conceptual misunderstandings. Then writing a note on the student's tracking sheet as to what they worked on clarifying. Take note that the student went from red and yellow to green as a result of this Tier 2 additional support within the Tier 1 environment, informed by the student's tracking sheet for this unit of study. Establishing student data folders can be a powerful way to engage learners as assessment partners so that they can become active owners of their own learning. This slide provides yet another example of how a team of 6th grade teachers implemented a system within their standards-based unit plans so that students were always aware of where they were and where they were headed. At the end of the year, the learning results of this 6th grade team were impressive. Their students had better growth in math than 82% of the other 6th grade teams in the state of Washington, and better growth in ELA than 70% of other 6th grade teams. They attributed these exceptionally high student growth percentiles, or SGP, which you might remember from Unit 1 when we looked at our Washington School Improvement Framework data and looked at our SGP. They attributed these exceptionally high student growth percentiles to the system of standards-based unit planning in which students were engaged as authentic assessment partners that they had developed. Yet another example is in having students monitor their individual progress in English language proficiency. Once the school implemented English learners as assessment partners in their English language proficiency assessment, they went from only 2 students reaching level 4 to 14 students reaching level 4. The second year of implementation, they added the color-coded proficiency scale at the bottom, and that year they went to 45 students reaching level 4. Additionally, in this school, students are not only monitoring their own progress, they also understand how they are contributing to their school-wide improvement SMART goal in the area of English progress. And finally, in this example, we see a school that, during the pandemic, developed an online assessment and goal tracking notebook with tabs for each course, as well as for those students working toward English language development. What creative and effective strategies for engaging students as assessment partners throughout your standards-based unit planning process might you develop and implement? As we complete Unit 8 on creating student tracking sheets to engage students as assessment partners, please take a significant pause and reflect on the following questions. How are you engaging students as assessment partners throughout your standards-based unit of study? Is everyone in the system clear about the standards-based assessment criteria? How do students chart and monitor progress during the unit of study? How can you build on what you might already be doing within your system? Thank you for taking some significant time to reflect on these questions, as having student as assessment partners is a key equity move. As has been discussed throughout this course, it is the learning targets and standards and proficiency scales, as well as the pre-informative assessments aligned to those targets and scales, that drive the standards-based unit planning process, not necessarily the instructional materials. The instructional materials are there to support the delivery of effective instruction, tightly tied to those target scales, pre and formative assessments. Therefore, it becomes critical for teachers and teacher teams to dig deeply into the instructional materials to discover where alignment occurs to the units of study or not. For just one example, in one school, all 8th graders took algebra. However, only 19% were proficient on the 8th grade state math assessment. Upon engaging in this work of standards-based unit planning, they discovered that the entire algebra book was written at level 2. It was a huge aha to discover that the instructional materials were not giving students learning opportunities at levels 3 and 4. In determining alignment of the instructional materials to your standards-based unit of study, consider the following questions on the next 2 slides. What are the materials you're using? How might you check to see if the learning targets are explicitly addressed? How might you ensure that the instructional materials provide students learning opportunities at proficiency levels 3 and 4? What about key vocabulary? Do the instructional materials provide pre-assessment so you and your students know where you're starting from? Do the instructional materials provide formative assessments so you and your students can monitor growth and the next steps toward the end of unit learning target and success criteria? Do the instructional materials provide student choice in providing evidence of their proficiency at the end of the unit so they can show how they can apply their proficiency to a new and novel real-world scenario in level 4? Rather than embarking upon this process of aligning instructional materials to your standards-based unit of study all alone, how might you collaborate with others? How might you engage in this standards-based unit planning process and instructional materials alignment as a horizontal team, as a vertical team? What about any possible interdisciplinary connections and interdisciplinary collaboration? Using handout number 12, aligning instructional materials to the standards-based unit plan, consider key questions around alignment to standards-based target and scales, opportunities for level 3 and 4 learning, alignment to standards-based pre-informative assessment, and opportunities for collaboration around materials alignment. Pause this presentation and take some considerable time using handout number 12 to consider these questions. And even if there are other people on your team not taking this course, you might just share it with them and see if anyone wants to join you in the process. Finally, as you embark on instructional materials alignment to your standards-based unit plans, you may discover implications for needing to adjust the instructional calendar. Although pacing guides and year-at-a-glance documents can provide some general guidance, pre- and formative assessments are what really indicate the need for adjusting your instructional decisions. You may discover a need to reteach, to differentiate, or to accelerate. What did you learn about your instructional materials alignment to your unit of study in the Unit 9 activity? What were your thoughts about collaboration opportunities around a particular unit of study or around interdisciplinary connections? Any other thoughts about instructional calendar implications? How can you build on what you are already doing within your system? Again, pause this presentation, take significant time to reflect on Unit 9, aligning the unit of study to instructional materials and vertical teaming. It is now time to complete the Unit 9 assignment. This is really one of the key culminating projects of this entire course. We will complete Unit 9 with an assignment that captures a standards-based unit planning process outlined throughout the course and that is suggested by the unit planning template. Using the standards-based unit planning template handout number 9 provided, or using a different template of your choice, or by creating your own template, choose a unit of study and remodel it by embarking on the standards-based unit planning process outlined throughout this course and as suggested by the unit planning template. Feel free to choose a unit of study that you do not particularly like or in which you do not feel particularly confident. Or feel free to use a unit of study that you really enjoy but want to have it align more closely with standards-based learning targets, proficiency scales, pre-informative assessments, as well as engaging learners as assessment partners throughout that unit. Or choose a unit of study from a brand new science kit or adoption. The choice is yours. Enjoy this end of Unit 9 assignment. Take a lot of time on it and really have some fun with this activity, of this assignment, because it is really the heart of this entire course. As we complete Eastern Washington University Education 452 and sponsored by Excel Education Resources, we now get to Unit 10, in which we discuss creating a system for standards-based unit planning to ensure equity for each and every learner. As stated in any search engine in which you ask, "What's a system?" the answer you typically get states, simply put, a system is an organized collection of parts or subsystems that are highly integrated to accomplish an overall goal. The system has various inputs which go through certain processes to produce certain outputs, which together accomplish the overall desired goal for the system. We began this course with its purpose, which also is the desired goal for creating a system of standards-based unit planning that ultimately we will dismantle the persistent academic growth and achievement gaps among students by demographics and program, that we will examine the role of integrated multi-tiered systems of support in addressing gaps, that we will identify the non-negotiable elements of effective Tier 1 practices necessary for closing growth and those achievement gaps, and to engage students as assessment partners to see themselves in their work in order to build growth mindset and self-agency toward equitable practices and outcomes. System thinking in schools can be seen in the standards-based unit planning process we have been engaged in throughout this course. As described in the article whose link is seen below, by viewing teaching through a systems thinking lens, educators can help students recognize how seemingly disparate systems interact, identifying meaningful connections in the world around them. This not only deepens students' understanding of specific subjects, but also strengthens their critical thinking abilities. There's a link to systems thinking in action in education at the bottom of this slide. Creating a system of standards-based unit planning brings together disparate sets of activities and creates relationships among them toward the desired goal of effective standards-aligned Tier 1 instruction so that each and every student can experience growth and success toward greater life chances. This means bringing together high levels of conceptual understanding about what we're learning, clarity around learning targets and scales, ensuring pre-informative assessments guide the learning journey for both teachers and students, and engages students as our assessment partners. Earlier in this course, we described the important research of John Hattie around the effect size of collective efficacy for both teachers and students. Creating a system of standards-based unit planning builds collective efficacy among everyone in that system. How might you create a system of standards-based unit planning in your classroom? How might you help lead in creating a system of effective Tier 1 instruction in your school or district so that each and every learner experiences high levels of growth, hope, and success so that you realize equity? After completing this course, what are you now thinking about the critical foundations of standards-based unit planning and ensuring effective Tier 1 instruction? What are you now thinking about the process of standards-based unit planning? What are you now thinking about engaging learners as assessment partners through the unit's learning journey? And how might you contribute to set up a system of standards-based unit planning in your class, grade level, department, or school? Please pause this presentation now and complete Unit 10 reflection, creating a system for standards-based unit planning. We now come to the Unit 10 assignment and culminating project for Eastern Washington University Education 452, sponsored by Excel Education Resources. Using the literature reviews, activities, and unit reflection handouts for Units 1 through 10 of this course, as well as the Unit 10 assignment rubric, complete the Unit 10 assignment and culminating project by writing a 3 to 5 page paper on how you might create a system for standards-based unit planning. Again, please see the accompanying rubric in your resources. I want to thank you again for participating in standards-based unit planning. Using handout number 14, Post-Learning Target Self-Assessment, take a few final moments to ask the question, where am I now? You might want to jot a few notes down about your next steps to continue growing your skills, understanding, application, and maybe even leading in standards-based unit planning. Thanks so much for engaging in standards-based unit planning and for helping to realize equity by ensuring effective Tier 1 instruction for each and every learner. My name is Dr. Janine Butler. My email is here if anyone wants to contact me. Thank you again for participating.